which takes inspiration from on the one side from antinatalist philosophy and antinatalist bioethics, from creation ethics and reproductive ethics, but also from so-called the exit ethics. And I would like to show how this mixed frameworks can be useful, or what's new, or what's challenging, maybe not necessarily new, but what's challenging can bring to the way how we usually think about our future in space in terms of space settlement. Let me start from the obvious observation that outer space is obviously physically inhospitable. But I would like to point out that from the fact that space is inhospitable doesn't follow automatically any ethical obligation, any moral obligation to make space amenable or hospitable. So we may assume that it may be good if we are aimed at protecting people who already exist here or there. But if we are thinking about future people, future generations, which we expect that maybe in long-term future they will live somewhere in space, such way of thinking can become sometimes dangerous, and we should look at it in a little bit suspicious way when this way of thinking about future space habitats becomes a sort of thinking about reproductive system which is designed to secure future species survival. And let me start from, let me introduce the concept of pronatalism. Pronatalism it can be defined as culture, ideology, philosophy, ethics, which central idea is that reproduction is something good, usually something which is expected, desired, at least is something neutral. And what is specific for philosophy, culture, ethics, ideology of pronatalism is that from pronatalist perspective, you are never expected to justify yourself why you reproduce. Rather, non-reproduction is something which is being asked for explanation. And we can give a lot of examples in many societies, many states, many cultures, but also in many levels and areas of our social life. And my point is that that our culture is usually rather pronatalist, definitely not antinatalist, and this pronatalism is present also in the way how we think about space settlement, how we think about our future in space. And this common survival narrative, which is rooted to some extent in this pronatalist metaphysics or pronatalist culture, runs like this. From the fact that Earth is fragile, that humanity faces many existential and catastrophic risks, we conclude that we should become multiplanetary. For that reason, we should settle in space. It should be permanent settlement, and obviously we have to reproduce. But such way of thinking hides a sort of moral link, because on the one side we have one issue, on one challenge, which is the risk of extinction and an attempt to prevent extinction. On the other side, we have the idea to create future people, but they are separate things, and separate justifications are needed for both of them. And here I would like to challenge this dominant metaphor in the way how we think about our future in space and space settlement, which can be reduced to the metaphor of the ark. Ark is something which carries life forward, Arc is something which assumes that continuation of life has high moral value, and as a consequence, non-reproduction becomes a failure in this model. And instead of arc, I would like to propose the concept of hospice habitat. Hospice habitat is not about death, it's not about dying. This is the habitat which is interested in care. What is the central value from the idea of the hospice habitat is care. It's not continuation, it's not survival, but care. And maybe the word parameters does not sound as the most optimal choice of words here, but if we are looking for some kind of criteria or parameters for this concept of arc, it will be survival, continuation, reproduction, species. While for the idea of hospice habitat, it will be dignity, care, autonomy, meaning, but also the possibility of ending well. And the last one is introduced by the exit ethics, which I will introduce in next slides. So, as we see, there are two different set of values lying behind of ideas in the way how we think about our future in space. And here we come to another inspiration for this theoretical framework, which is taken from creation ethics and reproductive ethics. So it is worth to keep in mind that we are talking about ethics in a closed world, in closed environment, and we may consider to change leading question from the question if spaceborne child will have life worth continuing to another question, if this life is worth starting under these conditions. I don't mean in general, I mean under these conditions of future space settlement. So here we have two categories which can be useful, which are already present in reproductive ethics, like life worth living and life worth starting or life permissibly created. And another point is that in this closed environment, space reproduction is and always will be ethically burdened. Why like that? Because every child which will be born in some future space habitat will be born into controlled atmosphere, rationed resources, limited or no medical care, restricted movement, small political community, mission-dependent social life, and probably no real exit. So there are some constraints which maybe they are permanent, maybe some of them can be removed at least to some extent, at least at some stage, maybe some of them are permanent, so-called hard constraints. We can talk about soft constraints, permanent constraints, and hard constraints which will be never solved. So this fact makes this space reproduction definitely not ordinary sort of procreation. This is procreation which will happen in a designed, closed, and high-risk course. So this is why my proposal is under this theoretical framework that the default presumption should be to not reproduce unless the habitat can justify the life it creates. And one of ideas which we can find in this literature and works related to reproductive ethics, future studies, and also human extinction and global catastrophe risk studies. One of ideas is that if we see that, or if we can predict that last generation or last generations lack care, we should create next generation to care for them. But such model such model, which is such way of thinking, which is pretty popular, mixes two different things, because on the one side we have care crisis. This is about care crisis. On the other side we have birth requirements. So such way of thinking is mixing identified care crisis with birth requirement. And my point is that children must not be created as tools for something, like shouldn't be created as workers, as caregivers, as demographic stabilizers, as symbols of hope or national pride or something like that, or as broadly understood instruments of settlement survival. And here I would like to move to this concept of hospice habitat, that taking perspective of this hospice habitat, we are not interested so much in permanent settlement, what rather we are interested in our duties and obligations towards people who are already there, who already exist. Do not forget about people currently living. And this is why this concept of hospice habitats introduces different priorities regarding hierarchy of values and principles. From the perspective of hospice habitat, what matters more is care than continuation, is dignity than demographic success, is care for existing persons than for possible future persons, and just meaning and happiness of life without any reproductive obligation. And here let me introduce the concept of the exit ethics. Exit ethics is about exit. And but in philosophy is not so obvious. Exit ethics is about exit. So from the perspective of exit ethics is not only about space settlement and such stuff. For instance, the right to die is an example of exit ethics considerations. Yes, I have a right to die if I want for some reason, yes, or I will meet a lot of constraints, yes. So, regarding the context of space settlement, exit ethics will ask the following question: if this person in this future space settlement can refuse treatment, can refuse mission roles, can refuse reproductive expectations, or if this person can decide to not continue life if they will find that life become unbearable. So, what we are interested in this hospice habitat ethics and exit ethics, and we are interested in protecting people against forced survival, but also against pressure death. And what is central here is the right not to be kept for the mission goal or mission success, also for the success of species survival. And to conclude, I would like to point out that the idea of making space amenable has some limits, that even if we are able to build habitat which will be relatively comfortable, will, from technical point of view, operate relatively well, it can be still coercive, it will be still confined to close environment, where we will meet the risk of imposing some reproductive duties to people who live there. And to conclude, my point is that regarding antinatalist philosophy, which in opposition to pronatalist states that better is not to reproduce than to reproduce because of future suffering and all other issues, this is a sort of paradox or tragedy of antinatalist philosophy, that it cannot be applied, it cannot be implemented as a default mode, because we will stop to exist, yes? So this is obvious that I am not thinking about antinatalism as a sort of possible public ethics, so-called. Just my point is that antinatalist framework brings interesting concepts and asking hard questions regarding issues which we usually take for granted. Yes, we will see that in general, but in the context of space in particular, this prometheus culture takes for granted a lot of stuff. Yes, that we will just leave space. Yes, it will go some way. But antinatalism requires or even demands justification. So my point is, the final conclusion is that even settlement which ends without reproducing may be also successful from ethical point of view. It will be not successful from political, national, military, economic, or demographic, but from ethical point of view, it can be still successful, it can be still good thing. And sometimes the ethical task and the ethical goal is not to continue for any cost, but to care for those already alive, even if we will not have any future generation.